All right, so the new handout there available, hanging over the edge there, page 13, but it says Daniel 7 at the top, and the phrase one like a son of man, or one like the son of man, that's a phrase found in Daniel 7, 13, and 14. Now, of course, last week we talked about the fact that we were only intending to study Daniel 1 through 6 because it does form a section. And that's true in the sense that when you get into chapter 7 and following, you have some unique, a unique category of literature. It's very apocalyptic is the word that's used, meaning there are a lot of visions and symbolism and things that don't mean... the things that are not to be understood only on the surface and literary level, but you're supposed to understand the symbolism behind it. So there's just a lot of those things that are strange to our ears. We don't usually think in terms of like that. And for the most part in those chapters, beginning in chapter 7 in Daniel, Daniel himself doesn't understand the visions that he sees. He sees these visions and he describes what he sees, but then he says, I was troubled in my spirit. I didn't understand what this was, so I either prayed or I asked the angel that appeared to him, to give him the interpretation. In other words, in Daniel 1 through 6, Daniel is always giving the interpretation of dreams. Remember? Nebuchadnezzar, Belshazzar, and all these other visions and dreams that they have, Daniel interprets. But in chapter 7 through 12, Daniel needs an interpreter to explain to him the meaning of the things he sees. So that's a big difference. Now, the reason that we're going to look at chapter 7 in addition to the first 6 chapters is because there is a sense in which it belongs to these early chapters, and here's how. Do you know that the Old Testament, first of all, what language was the Old Testament written in? English? Now, the New Testament was written in Greek. The Old Testament was written in Hebrew. The Hebrew. Now, that's not entirely true, though. There are places where there's Aramaic, which is very similar to Hebrew. It's like a sister language. It was actually a later language that the Jews spoke about the time Jesus came, and a couple of centuries before that. So Jesus probably spoke in Aramaic a lot more than he spoke in Hebrew. But the point is that Aramaic sections are found in the Old Testament here and there. Now this is the largest one, though, from Daniel chapter 2 and verse 4 all the way through chapter 7 of Daniel. So you see, that's all Aramaic. That's a different language than you find in Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and all those other books. It is a large portion of Aramaic. Why would chapter 7, since I showed the distinction here between 6 and 7, why would chapter 7 also be part of that block of Aramaic? Well, that's the reason I'm going to cover chapter 7, because there is a phrase in chapter 6 that I think chapter 7 is put into that section to explain. And that is what King Darius wrote in the last paragraph of chapter 6. If you'll remember, it says that King Darius wrote in verse 25 of chapter 6 to his people, his subjects. In verse 26, he says, I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom men must tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. And now here's the phrase, or the point I'm looking at. He is the living God and steadfast forever. His kingdom is the one which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion or rule shall endure to the end. That phrase is what Daniel 7 really explains and extrapolates. Is that the right word? So Daniel 7 is like an appended section to this whole Aramaic portion of Daniel that is a different kind of literature that we just explained, but it really gets into an elaboration on what does it mean to say that God has a kingdom that will endure forever, and his kingdom will not be destroyed. That's chapter 7. That God's kingdom is the one that endures. And so, as Christians, we look back in hindsight on these kinds of things and we understand it a lot more fully because Jesus came to reveal it to its fullest, and he established it, didn't he? The kingdom of God, the kingdom of Christ, the kingdom of heaven is the way it's phrased in the New Testament. That's the kingdom that we're talking about. And as Christians, you're a part of it. What a privilege, right? We get to be a part of a kingdom that will never be destroyed. So even though this world may be destroyed, we won't be, and the kingdom we're a part of won't be, because Jesus is the king, and it will stand forever. That's what our hope is, right? That's what our expectation and privilege is. So that's what this is about. So that's why we're going to look at Daniel chapter 7, is this elaboration on the kingdom. So the big phrase is that phrase at the top of the page, one like the Son of Man. Already that phrase, Son of Man, starts ringing in your head because you read it a whole lot in Jesus' ministry. So let's look at these introductory comments, and that will help to explain that. It says Daniel 7, and specifically verses 13 and 14, records Daniel's vision of, quote, one like the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven. So if you look at Daniel 7:13, Daniel even explains that he was watching in the night visions. So evidently at nighttime God would give him visions. He would see things appear in whatever format that might be. I tend to think of like sitting in a theater and you see the screen in front of you and whatever appears on the screen. You know, that's what's in our vision whenever we go to the movies, right? Well, these are supernatural. God is giving Daniel visions. And some of them, it's like, well, that would be a really cool movie to see. Even though I'm not really sure what it means, it's a lot of cool, colorful images. Daniel's going to explain that in the first part of the chapter, but he says in verse 13, and I was watching in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven, and he came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. So that's the phrase that this title of our notes comes from. It says, to this person was given, this Son of Man person, was given dominion, glory, and a kingdom. That's verse 14. It says, then to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, so that all peoples, nations, languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom the one which shall not be destroyed. That's almost verbatim what Darius wrote, wasn't it?
I have a question already for you.
Mm-hmm.
On that number, in that verse 13,
Uh-huh.
where it says the very last part, and they brought him near before him.
Yeah, very good. They brought the Son of Man, him, near before him, the Ancient of Days who's sitting on the throne. Because it says he came to the Ancient of Days. That's the phrase right before it, right? So he, the Son of Man, came to the Ancient of Days. And that's a phrase talking about there's a person sitting on a throne.
We're talking about God?
Yeah. So they brought him, the Son of Man, before God, before him. As a New Testament Trinitarian, we say the Son was brought before the Father on the throne, right? But of course, the Old Testament doesn't speak that way. But that's kind of the mystery in the Old Testament. It's like, wow, what is that? How can that be? You know? Well, the New Testament explains how. Okay, very good. Good question, though. Excellent. That means you're really looking at that text and thinking about it. That's good. Yes.
I'm glad they're getting ahead of things. You know, it makes me think of, when Jesus, in Acts 1, where Jesus left, in the cloud.
Yes.
And then I guess those same clouds, they delivered to God.
That's right. So Jim's bringing up a New Testament passage that, wow, it sure sounds a little bit like that, right? It's Acts chapter 1, verses 9 through 11, that records the ascension of Jesus, remember. In fact, Jim, I thought maybe you read the next sentence on my outline here, because that's exactly what we talk about. I'm glad you brought it up. That segues right into it. Let's read that next sentence in our outline at the top. It says, this is Daniel's vision from a heavenly viewpoint of what Acts 1, 9 through 11 records from an earthly viewpoint. See, you hear that? See, Daniel is given a vision, but it's a vision as if you're in heaven. Because you're at the throne room where God is sitting on the throne, and it's in heaven. And Daniel is seeing this, and he sees this Son of Man, which, by the way, means a human being. He sees a human being escorted by all of the attendants around the throne, escorted right up to the throne before the God who's on the throne. See it? So Daniel's seeing it in heaven. In Acts 1, verses 9 through 11, you want to turn there? And Jim, you're probably there. Jim will read for us Acts 1, 9 through 11.
And after he had said these things, he was lifted up while they were looking on, and a cloud received him out of their sight. And as they were gazing intently into the sky while he was departing, behold, two men in white clothing stood beside him. And they also said, Men of Galilee, why do you stand looking into the sky? This Jesus, who was taken up from you into heaven, will come in just the same way as you have watched him go into heaven.
This is a record of what it looked like from earth. There's the group of men, a group of people around Jesus who had been raised from the dead 40 days earlier, right? And he, on this occasion, began to ascend into heaven until the clouds eventually obscured him from sight and he was gone. So the earthly viewpoint is there. The heavenly view, what happened on this occasion, is recorded by Daniel. He saw it in a visionary form centuries before. So what happened in Acts 1, 9 through 11, when the apostles and the people were gathered around Jesus and they saw him ascend, as it says, go into heaven, where did he go? I know we say into heaven, but where specifically?
Before the throne.
I'm sorry?
Before the throne.
He went to the throne. Because we know that now because of what Daniel saw. He was escorted to the right hand of the throne of God. Now, there's a lot of implications to that, and which is just basically studies in the New Testament to know more about what that means. But one of the things that it means is that a human being now has been exalted above all other powerful creatures in heaven. All of the angels, we call them, the cherubim, seraphim, the throne attendants, all of these things. A human being is above all of them. That's the idea. They escorted the human being. They were the closest to the throne until Jesus came. And now they escort him right to the right hand. And again, what is meant by the right hand of the one on the throne? All of his power, all of his authority. It's through this human being that the one on the throne exercises all of his power. It's like the scepter in the right hand of the one on the throne. A symbol of his power and that which wields his power. It's Jesus. So that's why Matthew 28, 18 through 20, right before he ascended, Jesus said, all authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. And then he gave the last commission there, that last commandment, go and make disciples of all the nations. Obviously on the basis of the fact that Jesus is the great king now. So he ascended, and that's where he is. So, are you beginning to see the beauty and power of Daniel 7? That directly relates to us. I mean, we're getting ready to enter into a time of worship, and we're worshiping the one who is at the right hand of the throne. So, it says that sentence that I started reading, this is Daniel's vision from a heavenly viewpoint of what Acts 1 records from an earthly viewpoint when Jesus ascended to heaven and established his kingdom church. And I could even put their citation of Acts 2, because that's what Peter explains in the next chapter of Acts. David didn't ascend to the right hand, but instead David, who was the king of Israel, he spoke of the one who is to ascend, the Christ. And now that's where he's ascended, and he's poured out this which you now see and hear. In other words, the Holy Spirit being poured out there in Acts chapter 2 that gave the signs and the powers and so forth that gave evidence that, yeah, he's there now. It's a beautiful thing. All right. Any comments?
Yes.
Yes.
Visions, why were the visions given? Was that to prepare for the New Testament of when Jesus really came? Or why would?
It's all God revealing in, we might say, portions and pieces of what He's working for the salvation of His, salvation of the world. What's
Other
that?
people, whenever Daniel had a vision and he had it interpreted, did other people know about his vision and understand?
If they read His book, that's why it's recorded. And, for the last 2,600 years, it's been recorded for us in the book of Daniel. So if people believe the Bible and study it prayerfully and honestly, they will know too. And that's what we're trying to do this morning. It's part of the growth and learning and the teaching ministry of the church. That's right. But yeah, the Jews read the writings of the prophets. In fact, Daniel 9, which we won't get to, I promise, in this class. But Daniel 9, the first few verses explains Daniel himself was reading. Carter, do you remember what book he was reading? Not Isaiah, but the next one. Jeremiah. So Daniel, over in captivity, was reading writings from Jeremiah. And he learned, it says he learned from that God had promised 70 years of captivity. And so when Daniel looks at the calendar, he goes, wait, we're at 70 years. It's time to go home. I trust God. So he begins to pray. That's what Daniel 9 is about, his long prayer about going back to the land, the Jewish people going back and reestablishing the Jewish community. And then the angel appears and gives an explanation of how and when all of that will be fulfilled. And it gives you a timeline right up to the Christ, the Messiah. It's just fascinating. But again, it's kind of difficult for a Sunday morning Bible class if you're going to get into it to the kind of tedium that I like to do. And it's not always what you like to do, and that's understandable. But that's why we were just going to kind of stop at Daniel 6. But I have no self-control, so who knows? Who knows where we're going to stop? But no, that's why we're including chapter 7, is because you can see now how it's an embellishment on Darius's own statement there. That, okay, there's a kingdom that's never going to be destroyed. It has ultimate stability. The problem is all of the earthly kingdoms that have ever come have also gone. And it's probably a good lesson for us to remember, because it's so easy for us to rest in the power of our military and the power of our nation, especially when we go and remove a dictator overnight in a matter of hours from another country. Wow. I mean, no, the world has never seen that kind of military prowess and that kind of military, the technology and all of the coordination and all of the logistics that goes into that. Never before, ever. So you can see why it can be tempting to think, hey, we have nothing to worry about. But the Bible says it doesn't matter how much power a human kingdom might accumulate. There's only one that you should place your ultimate hope in, your full devotion. And so always make sure that's your primary priority. Excellent. So the next little introductory phrase there at the top is just about that phrase, Son of Man. I say Daniel's prophecies held a very important place in the teachings of Jesus himself, because our Lord's favorite self-designation was that phrase, the Son of Man. He called himself the Son of Man more than he called himself anything else. Well, where did he get that phrase? I know that we tend to just want to think, well, it means he was a human, right? Not only was we believe he's God, but he's also a human. But where did he get that phrase? It's from Daniel 7:13. So he's identifying himself as the one Daniel saw. And so that was something that was quite blasphemous to people who didn't accept him as the Messiah, because he's claiming to be the one that Daniel saw 600 years earlier. Does that make sense? So he used it, I say here, about 80 times in the Gospels. And it comes from that verse. So that's an introduction. Anybody have any further comments, questions?
You know, when Diane asked that question, I was thought about Hebrews 1, talking about, God spoke in various things.
Okay.
And that kind of vision and stuff like that.
Yeah, I thought of that too, and as I kept droning on and on, I kind of forgot about it. So Diane asked about, not Daniel, but Diane asked about, about why did God give these little these visions from time to time, or revelation, that kind of progressive revelation. And I made the phrase, I said he gave them in portions and pieces or something like that, bits and pieces. And that's from, as Jim is reminding me, from Hebrews 1, verses 1 and 2, that says, God, who in times past spoke unto the fathers by the prophets in various ways at various times. So the phrase is various portions in various times. So he's talking about Old Testament revelation. It was not given in its fullness. It was simply painting pictures and giving some portions of it. And that's why the New Testament says even those Old Testament prophets often didn't understand what they were writing. Even in Isaiah or Jeremiah didn't understand the full. They saw the pieces, but oftentimes they were like, I'm not sure what all of this means. But the Hebrews 1:2 says, but that same God who did that, now in these last days has spoken to us by his Son. In other words, Jesus brought now the explanation and the revelation that explains all of that, so that we can see the big picture now. As Christians, we get to look back in hindsight on biblical revelation. But if we lived before Jesus was born, we would have to be looking in prospect and just trusting the good things that God said about what he's doing, so that we can be a member of the community of faith, right? So they're saved by faith too, but they're saved by a faith that says, I don't see it nearly as clearly as I wish I could, right? It's just not available to be known yet in the fullest way. But when Jesus came, that's what he gave us, and that's the New Testament scriptures and the New Covenant truth, right? We live 2,000 years after all of that. We can look back and study the Bible and come to an understanding that the Old Testament saints never could. And so that's why the Hebrews writer also says, of how much worse punishment do you suppose shall he be thought worthy who have trampled underfoot the Son of God? And, in other words, the Old Testament had a lot of punishments in it for disobedience and faithlessness. But the Hebrews writer belabors the point a few times, saying, how much worse do you think you are going to be liable to punishment for rejecting the ultimate revelation in Jesus? So the Hebrews writer has some scary statements in there, that there remains no longer a sacrifice for sin to those who willfully disobey, for those who just rebel against God and willfully whenever Jesus has been revealed from heaven. It's a scary thing. Or it should be scary to those who find themselves in rebellion against God. But that also should drive them to Jesus for salvation.
So now we live looking for the second coming.
We live in view or in prospect of the second coming. That's exactly right. And boy, these are excellent questions or comments, because it gets into stuff that just gets my motor running. I love to talk about these kinds of things. But the Old Testament had little figures and types of Jesus, of the coming of God, or the day of the Lord, that talked about God coming in a judgment, and then the hints of the renewal, the redemption that follows, even though it was always in those phrases that sometimes are like, man, where did that come from? That seemed like out of the blue. Well, the New Testament, I think, have a record of the statements that are now saying all that's going to take place when, what we just read in Acts 1, 9 through 11, right? He's going to come back in the same way that you saw him go into heaven. Well, what way is that? Appearing through the clouds, to where you look up and there's only clouds, but all of a sudden he appears through the clouds, and now he's back to judge and deliver his saints and redeem all that he wants to redeem. We'll leave it at that. But he'll redeem us for sure, and we are appreciative of that. So the New Testament further elaborates on that as well. So I hope that is not too confusing to you, but here's Daniel smack dab in the middle of it all, and he's seeing things that have not yet come to pass, but he's seeing a picture of what it will be, and we know from the New Testament that Jesus is the fulfillment of all of it. So, excellent, and I really appreciate all that. Is this working? Okay. So now let's get into our outline, because basically it's kind of walking through Daniel 7 and this point that we've been making. But it starts out by talking about can we call it the chaos and instability of human kingdoms, of human power. So that's Daniel 7 beginning in verse 1, because what he does is he says, again, it's a vision, right? Is it called a vision or a dream? What's it called? Lost my place. Yeah, visions. So, had a dream and visions. Okay, it's both. Daniel 7, verses 1 and following. The first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head while on his bed. So clearly these are night visions and dreams, right? Then he wrote down the dream, and he told the main facts. And Daniel spoke, saying, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. The great sea, by the way, is the Mediterranean Sea. That's how the Jewish people referred to the Mediterranean. It's the great sea. When you stand on the coast of the Mediterranean, you look out and you can't see the other side. So to them, it was like an endless abyss. And now the Jordan River that ran into the Dead Sea and the Sea of Galilee, it wasn't like that. You could see that it's not endless. But the Great Sea is just a way to refer to mystery, uncertainty, danger, chaos. It's like, that's not where we want to be, right? So that was the concept, the mental concept, and the poetic concept that is meant when you read about the sea foaming up its shame and so forth in a lot of the poetry of the Old Testament. But anyway, Daniel says, I saw that sea. I was actually standing on the shore, and he saw four great beasts that came up from the sea, and each was different from the other. So again, don't try to interpret yet. Just imagine Daniel seeing this as if it's playing out in the IMAX theater. And it's quite a colorful thing. It's like, wow, this might win a Golden Globe? Is that a movie? I don't even know how that works. But might win an award, right? It's so awesome and entertaining, I guess, to some extent. Verse 4, the first was like a lion, but it had eagle's wings on it. And I watched until its wings were plucked off. Ouch. And it was lifted up from the earth, and it was made to stand on 2 feet, just like a man. And a man's heart was given to it. And suddenly, another beast, a second one, like a bear. It was raised up on one side. Evidently, it was kind of distorted looking. It had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And they said this to it, arise and devour much flesh. And after this I looked, and there was another one. This one like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. And after this, I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast. Oh, dreadful, terrible, exceedingly strong. It had huge iron teeth. It was devouring and breaking in pieces and trampling the residue with its feet. It was different from all of the beasts that were before it. It had 10 horns I was considering the horns, and there was another horn, a little one, that came up among them, before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked out by the roots. And there in this horn were eyes, just like the eyes of a human, and a mouth speaking pompous or maybe blasphemous words. Well, cool. Bible class is done. We'll see you in worship. That's the whole thing. It's like, that doesn't tell me anything other than what he saw. The visions, the images, the creatures, and a description of them. So there's no interpretation given yet. Now, of course, there will be, because Daniel is going to be so troubled by all of these things that he's going to ask, that the angel is going to come and say, here's what this means. And then whatever the angel chooses to give him, or at least what he records for us, is all we have. We might wish we knew more about some of the details, and if it's just not revealed, I guess we can guess or surmise or give our best educated guess, but that's what we must claim. It's just a guess, or it's something that I believe is part of this framework. But that's what Daniel is going to receive as an explanation. Now, I want to stop at verse 8 and look back at our notes, because this is our first major point. It says, terrifying visions of earthly kingdoms. That's what we know this is going to be because of the interpretation given. Earthly kingdoms. Now, this doesn't come as much of a surprise to us, because we've already seen in 6 chapters of Daniel that it's really about that. It's a contrast between Daniel, who serves the true King of Kings, and all of the other earthly kings that he served in Babylon and now in Medo-Persia, right? So it's not surprising to know that these are kingdoms, which we will see more explicitly later, but I guess I should say trust me for now until you see it later. But the point here is that it's a terrifying vision of how, I guess, strong and scary these kinds of powers can be, right? Daniel is initially terrified by visions of earthly kingdoms rising out of the sea. Again, what's the significance of saying they're rising out of the sea?
They're rising out of chaos.
It's chaotic. It seems as if, well, it's just a whole world of chaos, and yet now we have some kind of order that comes out of it. But boy, is it really something that we're going to be able to trust in? Is it something we're going to be able to say, now here is full order. This is what it's all about, order out of chaos. The point will be is that, first of all, you've already seen one rose and then it fell. Another one rose and then it fell. Another one rose and then it fell. Another one rose, and it seems like it's the most powerful one. And yet you're seeing there's internal strife and struggle going on, and all kinds of chaos going on in that most powerful one yet. Does that make sense? That's the point of Daniel, the book of Daniel. And so that's why it terrifies him, because it's like all of these powerful nations are still not the answer to the human problem. They have their role. God uses them to whatever extent he sees fit, but it's not the answer. So the next, under letter A there, I say these human kingdoms are depicted as powerful animalistic beasts. So that's another thing. It's not just that they come from chaos. It's that they're animalistic. So that's a theme in the Bible quite regularly. Are you behaving as a human that is quite different than other creatures that breathe air and walk on land, or than animals? Or do you really kind of behave by your own fleshly instincts? Because ultimately, human kingdoms that are corrupted by power begin to behave like that. They just want more power, and they want to devour, and they want to destroy, and that kind of thing. So it says they're depicted as powerful animalistic beasts, a lion, a bear, a leopard, a fourth beast. Of course, the fourth beast is almost like it's not even fully an animal even. Here it's depicted as a cyborg, I say. In other words, it's half metal and half animal, isn't it? It says he had iron teeth. Animals don't have iron teeth. cyborgs are half metal and half creature, half flesh. Anyway, these represent kingdoms of men, animalistic and power hungry, but ultimately agents of danger, chaos, controversy, and of course the whole point of the chapter is going to be instability is what it's all about. Now, here I just give the identification of these, and I don't guess I have time to explain scripturally why we say this, but it's pretty much universally acknowledged by Bible scholars that this is a depiction of the kingdoms of the world from Babylon forward to Rome. And any history book will show you the world powers from Babylon to Rome, and they are Babylon, that would be the lion. And then the next one was Medo-Persia, which is what chapter 5 and 6 recorded. Remember the transition from Babylon to Persia, to Media-Persia. That was the bear in verse 5. And then what was the next kingdom? Greece. Macedonia is Greece, the Grecian Empire. And they had one main king that conquered all of the lands. Alexander the Great. You've probably heard of him either from history or from Bible classes, because Alexander the Great is alluded to in the book of Daniel a number of times because of his significance in the flow of human kingdoms. But that's verse 6, the leopard. The leopard is also very fast, isn't it? So it kind of depicts a very swift destruction. Alexander the Great ruled from age, 23 to 32 or something like that? That's not very long. A decade, maybe?
Well, they also, his soldiers, his elite ones also wore leopard.
Oh, did they? Okay. Yeah, Carter's giving me something I don't guess I remember reading, or I've never...
Yeah, his companion Calvert did.
Okay, so he had...
There's a lot of layers to this.
Okay, very good. So the leopard idea, the way I always thought of it, at least initially, was just the speed at which he conquered, which still stands as an amazing thing to all historians. Like, man, he was really a brilliant warrior. For being in his 20s. In his 20s, he led armies all over the world and conquered lands greater than the Assyrian, than the Babylonian and the Persian empires. He died when he was like 32, I think, or 33, and in India. So he had gone all the way from Greece, across the world, all the way to India, and he was still like, all right, get yourself ready. We're going on to the next place, and his army was like, we're not going anywhere else. I mean, in other words, they can't. He just ran them out of gas, and then he died somehow. Maybe, I don't know how. Historians probably explain. From a mosquito bite. Well, that's tough. The toughest man on the planet gets killed by a mosquito. But again, isn't that just a great illustration of the instability even of the most powerful people in the world? So that's what we're seeing there in the leopard, verse 6. In verse 7, this fourth beast, the next one in line after Greece, was the Roman Empire. Now, of course, that was the empire that was in charge when you read the New Testament. So that's when Christianity was established, when Jesus lived and then established the church, was during the Roman Empire. So that's one of the reasons why the fourth beast is the last one described here. So,
I also like that Daniel records it as like the leopard. Like it describes the body as like a leopard. In the sense that Rome was very similar to Greece and how much it expanded and how powerful it was.
okay.
But it was different. It was like it, but it was different because of how powerful and strong it was.
Yeah, each of these kingdoms have different strengths and different weaknesses. And I think I brought some of that out from chapter 2 when Nebuchadnezzar had his dream of the metal man. Do you remember? Gold and silver and then bronze and then iron. Those are the same four kingdoms that we're talking about here. So Nebuchadnezzar had a dream that depicted these four kingdoms too. Babylon at the top, and then Medo-Persia, then Greece, and then Rome. So this is just the way Daniel's book reveals these kinds of things. It's about kingdoms. But here you're seeing the instability, the raw animal-like thirst for flesh, that kind of thing that human kingdoms usually result in. So, that's the big Roman numeral 1, okay? And let's talk about verses 9 and 10 before class is over, because here Daniel, so what, he was standing on the great sea, right? And he saw this was in his vision. Well, now in verses 9 and 10, his vision shifts to the heavenly realm. It's like Daniel saw that, then the scene was over, and then what popped up was the heavenly realm, what was going on in heaven, not on earth. And he said in verse 9, I watched until thrones were put in place, and the Ancient of Days was seated. So Diane, there's the answer to your Ancient of Days. So here, he's just seeing the throne room with God seated in the ultimate place of power. But there were thrones, plural, all around. So there's other authorities, there's other rulers, and we know that from the New Testament, especially book of Ephesians, right? Principalities, powers, and rulers in the heavenly places, those kinds of things. So there are other authorities, but there's only one that is ultimate over them all, and that's the one on the throne. And he's called the Ancient of Days, which again I think is just is it a merism? I can't remember the word. It's where you have a phrase that tries to imply a certain thing, and here I think it just means he's the eternal one. He's the one who supersedes all of them because he has no beginning and no end. That kind of thing. Anyway, it goes on to describe, it says, his garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne was a fiery flame, and his wheels a burning fire. Don't have time to get into all that, but there's a lot that could be said about that just for interest's sake and so forth. Verse 10 says, a fiery stream issued and came forth from before him, and thousands ministered to him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. So there are myriads of other creatures in heaven, in the heavenly throne room. You know, you think about how many humans have ever lived. Of course, even today, what is it, 7 billion? Something like that, or maybe if it's even more than that. I know that the larger the population is, the faster it increases, so it's like a snowball effect. But anyway, you know, when a Hebrew phrase says thousands of thousands and 10,000 times 10,000, it's not trying to say, okay, that means 100,000. It means you can't number them. There's so many. So that'd be just like we say, how many people have ever lived? Oof, I don't know. I just can't number them, right?
Oh, these are heavenly
Yeah,
creatures?
yes, this is a heavenly vision in the throne room of God. And so we as human beings are just one of various creatures of personage, that are persons and agents that God created. We're the only ones on earth. Animals are not personages. Human beings are, but then there are angelic, we call them, the angels of heaven, but that includes a whole lot of different kinds. And so there are innumerable amounts of those, but the point is that they're all standing before the throne, and they do acknowledge, or at least they should, if they don't, acknowledge the sovereignty of one, of a single ruler, and that's the one on the throne. But the point is, at the end of that, it says, at the end of verse 10, it says, the court was seated and the books were opened. In other words, judgment now is commencing. Judgment on what? On those 4 beasts that he just described. That's what this is going to be about. A judgment that is going to reveal the reality of what's going on.
But also, that's the same description of Jesus in Revelation 1, the same description of the throne room in Revelation 4.
Yeah.
So,
Revelation, the book of Revelation capitalizes on a whole bunch of this,
yeah.
and alludes to it and elaborates and sometimes adopts, because we're not talking about Jesus here. This is the Ancient of Days. He'll mention the Son of Man in verse 13 that we read earlier. But these descriptors are given to Jesus in Revelation 1, which is what Carter's mentioning, about the hair like wool, and his I don't know, fiery stream. Let's see. I don't know. There were garments white as snow, those kinds of things. That's Revelation 1 when John saw Jesus. Well, I mean, John is seeing a vision that is incorporating descriptors of God on the throne, the Father, and now applying them to Jesus, which the New Testament is trying to say what? Jesus is God too. Jesus is equal with the Father in his essence, in who he is, even though he fulfills a different role now as the Son. So, yeah, very good. So, yeah, if you read through the book of Revelation and you've just read through Daniel, you'll go, wait, I just read something very similar to that. Didn't John depict in Revelation 13 these beasts coming up out of the sea too?
Instead of 4, it was 2 beasts.
Yeah, well, there was,
But it had
there were,
heads just like the
right. The way that they were described, you know that he's still borrowing off of this imagery from the book of Daniel, but he's seeing Rome is the one that he's seeing in Revelation chapter 13, because that's the one that is depicted as being judged ultimately because Jesus came when Rome was ruling. And his reign supersedes and transcends even Rome, the most powerful one that has ever been seen according to the Bible. Okay. Anyway, thank you so much, and I hope that I haven't gone way too broadly on this, but we will continue on this handout next time and continue and talk about the establishment of the church and what that entails in Daniel chapter 7 and in the New Testament. So, all right, we will be dismissed there and prepare for worship. Thank you guys so much.
Get it out of today, Clint.